Maya's up next, and she's going to talk about effective pollination distance of transgenic American chestnuts, and she's from New York.
Hello, everybody. My name is Niesz Kutsch, and I'm a master's student at SUNY ESF. I'm working in the American Chestnut Research and Restoration Lab, and I'll be talking to you to the distance of transgenic American chestnuts. I'll get ahead of it now. I don't have a magic number or magic distance to tell you today, but we are working towards that. As you all may be familiar with after some of the earlier presentations today, the American chestnut was a very foundational species across the eastern United States. It was a very large food source, both in its pollen for many insects and the chestnuts for many animals and for people. They're also monoecious, meaning that a singular tree has both male and female flowers. And with the chestnuts, you typically see as they're maturing, they'll start making male flowers a couple years before they make female flowers. And then, around the turn of the 20th century, Cryphonectria parasitica, an invasive fungus, was accidentally introduced from Asia, and it causes the chestnut blight, which was extremely deadly to the American chestnut. It ended up wiping out the chestnut in a matter of decades, really. Yes. However, there is some light on the horizon for the American chestnut. Restoration is hopefully in the near future. Part of this is due to the lab I'm a part of has developed the transgenic darling chestnuts that are able to resist the blight, and one of the main goals of these chestnuts is to use them for restoration use. A large part of making sure this restoration is effective is understanding the natural effective pollination distance between two chestnuts where they can freely pollinate, to better understand what planting densities we should use in our restoration plantings. What we may already know is that from around less than 100 meters, there seems to be pretty decent pollination between trees, and past 1,000 meters, they seem to be effectively genetically isolated from each other. However, this is largely based on anecdotes, so we really want to get some stronger, more detailed numbers, and also get some scientific evidence backing those numbers up. The way we plan to do this is with our distance pollination experiment, which is based in Tully, New York. That's about a half an hour south of here. The goals of this are to, as I've said, determine the natural successful pollination distance of the American chestnut. And we also may learn from this a bit more about how these trees are pollinated. For a very long time, it was pretty unanimously agreed upon that the American chestnut was pollinated by wind. However, some recent papers have come out suggesting that insects may play an important role, and the results from this could inform that one way or the other. For example, I'll explain the setup of the experiment in a moment, but if we see a large pollination and large seed crop following the trajectory of the wind, that might suggest wind, whereas if the trees are pollinated in all directions evenly, that may suggest an insect involvement. So the way this experiment is set up is that yellow star at the center represents a plot of transgenic American chestnuts, and each of these triangles in their respective spokes are representing plantings of male sterile European hybrids. This way, the only source of pollen is coming from that center transgenic plot, so any trees that get pollinated, we know where that pollen came from, and we can measure that distance. This is the only permitted plot we have that has any open pollination of these transgenic trees, and there are also no other nearby chestnuts that could, that are near to this planting. So during open pollination season, a large release of pollen from the center plot will be able to pollinate the nearby trees. And we will be able to see, a drop off in how many viable nuts we're getting per tree as the distance increases, and from that gauge like a reliable pollination distance of these trees. This year, the trees in these spokes, they were a bit too young to have enough female flowers to really get a good data set. So what we pivoted to instead this year was first off just establishing that these transgenic Americans can interbreed with the European hybrids, because we haven't actually established that. This diagram on the left is showing what trees in the spokes were mature enough to have male flowers, which suggests that next year hopefully there will be female flowers at those spots. So next year we are hopeful that we will be able to do this experiment as intended. But what we are able to do this year, next slide please, is we had a few female flowers that did pop up in those spokes. So what we did instead was we hand pollinated those flowers. We had one flower at that southernmost little site and 2 flowers at that other tree up there. We hand pollinated them with transgenic American pollen to hopefully get a seed set from those few flowers. From that, we were able to prove that yes, these trees can interbreed, and the whole setup of the experiment is viable, and hopefully next year we will be able to do this experiment as intended. So that's about what we have this year. It's looking very promising for next year. Any questions?
You still got some minutes here.
Yes.
Any questions out there? We got one close here.
What does the big tree refer to? Is that just something that might be in the way of the wind, or is that like a more mature chestnut?
Are you referring to like the yellow star? Oh, big tree, the green squares? That was kind of another level. So we had in those spokes, the big trees are ones that are big, and I'm thinking, okay, this year they didn't have any flowers, but they could have flowers next year. As in, they're not like 6 inches tall anymore, they're like 5 feet. And I'm like, okay, maybe we'll get something next year. The triangles that didn't have anything, we had some struggles with survivability in our planting, so we're hoping to replant them with bigger trees to jumpstart some of that time frame. So yeah, the difference between big trees and the ones that had male flowers is they were big, but they didn't have the male flowers yet.
Got one in front here.
What's the cultivar of European hybrid that you have?
We have a few. The largest proportion of those, especially of the ones that were flowering this year, were Schlarbbaum and Bouche de Bédezec. I hope I'm pronouncing those correctly, but those were the main cultivars we had that were successful.
We got another one back here, right there.
Are you folks recording wind speed and direction at this site?
We are not doing that right at this moment, no. The spokes were planned to be in the direction of like the strongest wind direction, because it was, made with that in mind, that wind would play an important role. So but no, we are not measuring the wind speed at this time. Maybe we could think about adding that.